Okay, folks, we'll get started. So today's talk is about productivity. And obviously, since Microsoft has productivity talks, and we've been productivity tools, we've been writing software for decades, then we really should know how to do productivity on software. And we used to. There's a great book called Microsoft Secrets, and it was written in the 90s, and it was just when Microsoft was sort of moving into server software. And it sort of tells the philosophy at that time, and it was very much what you see now in San Francisco, which is the old work hard, trust the engineer. At that time, it was called PC hacking methodology, which is now agile. You have high pay, and then assume burnout. So basically, burn the people out, very alpha methodology, overnight bug bashes, all of those things. Attitude changed really around about the release of 2000 and Windows XP. And these were sort of horrendously difficult releases. They sort of were supposed to be out in about 98. They were all very late. And then Windows XP was supposed to be released the same time as Windows 2000. And what happened was that it just stressed everyone to get this whole thing released. And after it was released, there was a sort of massive turnover of people. There's a great phrase that was used. This is really too and hopefully they were, because of this. This was just before the dot-com crash. So, and these were people who were actually very talented, and they really liked what they were doing. But they started working on 2000, and they had children, and they left it, and they had teenagers, and they didn't quite see the two between. So. And this is a lot of institutional knowledge was lost at that time. And really, they realized the limitations on this trusty engineer. And so we went towards processes. And we had the big security issues. And that was the killer for the trusting the engineers. And so, and really before this, the sort of how to do increased productivity was just to shout louder at people. And they realized they had to stop people working weekends. They had to sort of move to a different system. And then, like anything else, where the pendulum theory was, it was too much trust the engineer, and then we went far too much to processes, which sort of bored everyone to death when they were doing development. And we go to where we are today, and we have continuous deployment. And continuous deployment, the idea is the developer sits in his office, they write code, they send the code to the users, they get immediate feedback from the users. And this is a great way of doing things because they have this great synergy with understanding how their software works. And they are responsible for ensuring the feature works. Their features works on the customer site. Obviously, they're also responsible for making sure it's secure. Oh, and then there's privacy. Oh, it has to be compliant with everything as well. And it's got to run on platforms like Windows and Mac, and it's got to go run on Android and iOS, and it's got to work on all of these things. Oh, and don't break legacy. Don't break what's happened in the past. And we're asking developers, we don't want developers to just sit in their office and writing because they're going to reinvent the wheel. What we want them to do is to use software that already exists, and we want them to be more efficient in using that software and incorporate that software into their software. And also, we want other people to use their software. So this is great. The engineers can now just invoke other people's software, use it as their own, except for the fact is if that software has security issues, then you've just inherited those security issues into your product. So not only do you have to be responsible for all these other factors, you have to inherit those factors from everywhere else, and then you become responsible. So when we then say, what do we want the engineer to be, and how do we want the engineer to be more productive, we really struggle to understand what does that mean. And then it depends very context specific. If you're writing the kernel, we do want you, you're not going to inherit anyone else's software. We want you to be sitting in your office and typing. If you're working on something which is very high up in the stack, then you want not only people to use your software, to use other people's software. So we want documentation. We want an awful lot of other things. So when we then say, well, what is an engineer today and how do we measure it, and then how do we make them more productive, we're struggling with that. But thankfully, we have the answer. And our speakers today are going to give us the answer. So the first speakers have said they are going to be controversial, so I hope they live up to their reputation of looking at it from a high-level point of view. One of the things is about productivity, from a systems perspective, productivity can induce stress. So Pete Card's looking at it from the customer's perspective, and they're saying that our tools actually generate an awful lot of stress to them. They generate emails, they generate a lot of things. So there's work going on to look at the impact of stress. David and Gurka is going to look at developer satisfaction. In the old days, it was like, well, they burn out, they leave. Now we tend to think happy engineers are more productive, and Peggy's done a lot of work on that. And then we've got Brian is going to talk about how they're trying to do. In fact, we've got a nice thing at the end whereby Brian's going to talk about how they are trying to understand developer productivity. And then Kim is going to give us a talk to say why it's impossible to understand developer productivity. So the way we're going to do the talks... Measure. Okay. Don't start arguing this early. So the way we'll do each of the things is that the speakers will talk, and then we'll do the Q&A at the end of each session. And the chairs are all knowledgeable in their areas. We're lucky to have Peggy give us the time to come along to do it. It's an so let's start off, and Abby can introduce the speakers.
Good morning, everybody. Is this working? Great. So I have the pleasure of introducing two luminaries in the field of human-computer interaction, both of whom come from psychology and work at the intersection of psychology and computer science, and who are experts in the human experience with technology. So first we have Yvonne Rogers, who's the director of the Interactions Centre at UCL, so University College London, who is a fellow of the ACM, who was elected to the SIGCHI Academy, which is a great honor in our field, and who is the co-author of the, probably, I guess, the best-selling HCI textbook in the world. I think it's now sold 200,000 copies in 5th edition. More than that? Okay. So that's super impressive. And done lots of work looking at the human experience in the workplace and in the home and just about everywhere else you can imagine. And then we have Steve Whitaker, who is a professor at UC Santa Cruz in the computational media department now, also a background in psychology, also a fellow of the ACM, also a member of the SIGCHI Academy, and the winner of the Lifetime Achievement Award at a very tender age, which is quite impressive as well. And he and Ofer, who's here, have also written a book on managing digital stuff. So a lot of work in the kind of personal information management area. But I just want to, before I turn over to them, I just want to say a little bit more about the career trajectories, because I've learned a lot about this over the last couple of evenings down the bar. So Yvonne actually started, her first job was in the ladies' underwear department at British Home Stores, and became an expert in stacking ladies' knickers. We call ladies' underpants knickers in London. And developed her organizational skills and also social skills, trying to manage the ladies who kept upsetting the stacks of knickers that she was putting together. So I think that was quite formative in her later career. She also worked on a kibbutz and in the kitchen, dealing with a lot of chicken carcasses, as I understand, for some kind of specialty that the Israelis love, and I think that explains why she's now a vegetarian. So that's Yvonne. Steve, as an undergraduate in Cambridge, so formative roots there, was worked on cavity wall insulation, and spraying stuff into the walls of people's homes, running up and down to the attic. That seems like a good start. And also work for the first Pringles factory, is that correct?
That's right.
Stacking Pringles.
First Pringles in the UK.
First Pringles in the UK. Stacking Pringles. So this is some of their more humble beginnings. But the other thing I learned about Steve last night is that his grandmother was a gypsy fortune teller. And he has some Romany blood.
I knew you would say that.
And he's predicted we're going to have a very good workshop today. But also, he's great to talk about the future of work and what we predict for the future of productivity. So with that, I'm going to welcome, I think, Yvonne first. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. Stacking means something different for me than what is commonly understood in this field. So when we talk about the stack, we refer to different kinds of and types of ladies' underwear. Right. So we're going to do a double act. Okay. And Steve was away in Australia, so I was given the job of writing the title and the abstract. And so I will talk for the first part on thinking about productivity from the organization's perspective, and he will then sort of take over and think about it from the individual's perspective. And I don't know if any of you have looked at the images from the last 2 days, but it seems that everyone has to have their hand up. So I found one of me. This is how you talk to people these days. So I will be looking at quantifying, and Steve will be what we've called qualifying, so looking at it from a qualitative perspective. And at the end, we will have some provocations to get a discussion going. So I'll need a bit of sound now, because I thought it's always good to start with a video. And back in the 50s, there used to be marketing as to how to get people to be productive at work. And this one, I wasn't around in the 50s, I have to say. But this one always stuck in my mind because of the jingle.
I'm rather good at crosswords. Nothing to make them too easy.
So get the sound, please.
Four-letter word beginning with E and ending in...
Can you hear that? Can you increase the sound? Okay.
Volume all the way up?
Yes, I did.
So try and get on with some productivity related stuff right now. Learn Spanish while we're doing this.
Try playing again.
I'm rather good at crosswords. Trouble is, I make them too easy. 6 down, let's see. Down. Four-letter word beginning with E and ending in S. A valuable food rich in proteins.
Eggs.
I beg your pardon.
A valuable food rich in proteins is eggs.
It is not eggs, it is eels.
It is eggs.
It is eels. I've written it down and it fits.
But if it was eggs, then 7 across a big pig.
It is not pig, it is pie.
But look at the clue. Pork, and you may hear it grunting.
Well, you've heard of a pork pie, haven't you?
I've never heard of one grunting. Look, change part to pig and pal to dog, and you've got eggs. And they're rich in protein and a very valuable food. Good value is egg-shaped.
You've completely muddled me up. I'll have to start again now.
That's it. Start the day right with eggs.
Oh, this is hopeless. Look, I've got right through the paper. It's your fault. Yes.
Okay, so the jingle was go to work on an egg, and I think 10, 20 years later, the Mars one was a Mars a day helps you work, rest and play. So there's always been something about eating before going to work, which will make you more productive. So I hope you've all had your eggs this morning, because we want a very productive workshop. So productivity, we take it for granted that we all know what it means, but it's usually defined as a measure of efficiency of someone completing a task. And that word efficiency is, you are trying to obtain some kind of result, a desired result in terms of a target. And the assumption about whether you can reach that target is that you have to be in a good state. So you have to be well fed, had your eggs, you have to be well motivated, you have to be talented, you have to be skilled, you have to be a good engineer, you can't just take the job, and you have to be healthy. And importantly, you have to be suitably rewarded. You have to have a good pay and various other kinds of rewards. And if all of these are met, then you can be productive. But within the world of work, we're always looking for ways in which to think about how we can improve productivity. And it's become the holy grail in business. And there are so many self-help books out there now to help you be more productive, not just at work, but also in your personal lives. And so it's an assumption that we can always do better. And I think, part of the workshop here is how can we improve productivity? And so there's been many attempts to do this. And it's the stick and carrot. The carrot is the incentives. You can get bonuses. I know at Microsoft, they give you huge bonuses if you do very well. Then there's staff recognition, where for many blue-collar workers, you can become the employee of the month and feel very proud of that and have a badge, or your photo will appear. We also have targets. Everyone has targets. In my field, when I do my appraisals, I have to get my staff to come up with stretching goals. I never really know why they have to stretch. I don't know why you can't just have goals, but you have to stretch. So you have to stretch yourself to reach those. And then there are lots of interventions that we've been thinking about to improve productivity of organizations. And sometimes humans are unpredictable, unreliable, and the automation, you can do it more productively. And so sometimes that takes place. But also we've been looking at how we can use tracking tools by which to measure how productive people are and think about how we can help them. There have been many indices that have evolved over time to measure efficiency. And these are just the most common ones: time on task, the sales per quarter, the number of calls made in a particular time span, a day or an hour, the number of hours saved or dollars saved over time, the reduction in costs, success rate, and for us in academics, it's the number of papers we have written that get published, or the number of grants that you can get, and a number of patents, and so on. So there are, depending on the context or the work setting, we have different types of indices. But one of the things that we all tend to do is that we compare these indices with something else. And so this, typically spreadsheet, sales sheets, you can use these to compare how one employee has done relative to another. And you can do this for certain time periods, and you can compare with other employees and companies. And part of this is that it allows you to track, to record, and visualize a group's performance at a glance. And this is a very powerful tool for management. So you see these types of dashboards, software dashboards everywhere, where it shows the targets for certain individuals over months or quarters, and then their actual sales. And you can see at a glance whether they've exceeded or they've underperformed. And this can be for management, but these tools can also be used for individuals themselves to motivate them. So someone I know, I've changed the names here, was showing me his weekly performance sheet. And he works for an employment agency where they match companies who want people to do particular jobs, and it could be gardening or it could be in the catering industry. And each week they are given this, which shows GM, that stands for their gross margin, which is the amount of dollars that each specialist, and the names at the top, have brought in for the company. And then the number of working, that's the number of matches they've made between the jobs that have come in and the people they can find to fill those jobs. And he was very proud to show me how, when he first started, he was able to bring in for the company $8,000, but as the week went on, his gross margin increased. And there was a particular month when he got very excited that he was like, you know, double than he began with, but also that he was better performing than others in his team. But they also increased their performance. And as a result of increasing the gross margin, the company took them on a jolly to Las Vegas, and this incentivized them even more. And so this can be very powerful as a way of comparing yourself with what you've done previously, but also with others. So it can provide positive feedback, this type of spreadsheet, performance sheet, that makes employees feel very proud and valued. But we know that it can put pressure on people to work very long hours, especially when they don't reach those targets. And it brings into question that this is a, you know, this sort of timesheet, spreadsheet has been used for centuries. What will the new tracking technologies do? Will they, you know, enhance the pros, or will they exaggerate or exacerbate the cons? I want to focus a bit on what new tools there are out there. And I think what's around the corner and what people are talking a lot about are the AI and cyber physical systems. And these are networks of sensors and AI and computers that are embedded into buildings that enable companies to track and detect and model more aspects of the workplace. And it can use low energy Bluetooth as well, by which to track where objects are or equipment relative to others in the room. And one place where they've made inroads is in the smart office, where, for example, workers who don't have their own office, and that's becoming increasingly common, they can book and select workplaces in advance, whether it's a cubicle or an office or a desk. And And so when they come, that office is there for them, but also they can swipe their access card, and their phone calls will be automatically routed to that desk. And that makes it more efficient. And also, they can also customize the lighting and other environmental aspects to their own personal preferences. So that's kind of a vision, and that's starting to happen using this type of cyber-physical system. Within hospitals, it's also being started to be used, real-time location systems for tracking equipment. And in one hospital, this system called the RTLS saved 10,000 staff hours annually by enabling staff to locate the devices they needed. It could be ultrasonic, various trolleys and x-rays, and once they'd located, to be able to know when to maintain and to clean them. And so the usage of equipment was greatly improved through using this type of cyber-physical system software. So I think the future of these types of tools is that they can quantify aspects of the workplace in terms of equipment. But now it's starting to think about, what about the workers? We could put wearables on them. We can track what actions they're doing and also what outputs. So having a much finer level of granularity. And one of the aspirations from this is to be able to predict more about their working patterns. So we heard yesterday about thinking about people's intentions or their intent. How can you predict what actions they want to do at an interface? When are the most productive moments might be, and how might you support that? When might be the best time for them to meet someone else? Is it in the morning? Is it in the afternoon? And so on. And when's a good time to have a break? And are they spending too long being distracted with social media and so on? So there's lots of ways in which you can think about how you start to track the individual and optimize the things that they need to do at certain times and reduce those behaviors that might be called slacking. And this has led a number of business leaders to be really excited about quantifying the workforce. And in Accenture, I don't know who this person is, but it was just this month, was saying how it's, nearly 80% of business leaders think that these tools will help them grow their businesses, transform the business for agility and efficiency, and help unlock the full potential of people. And they can be used to spot and improve work patterns, to speed time to market, or improve speed of adoption to change programs with customized incentives for individuals. So there's a lot of hope and promise for using cyber physical systems and AI to improve productivity even more. But the flip side, and this is what I think we need to think of, is it can make employees uneasy. And that it's now, within the media being reported as workplace surveillance, and it's increasingly being perceived to be too controlling and too invasive. And that many forms of this type of monitoring are considered to be socially unacceptable. It's invading people's privacy. And things like knowing when someone's gone to the toilet and for how long, and also analysing their social media, both at work and outside of work, and being able to eavesdrop on their conversations at work, and also looking at their staff calendars and how they're being used, and computer usage, which has been around for some time, but you can use AI to analyse the patterns much more than previously. And so the problem is that as we increase more opportunities and ability to track, it can at the same time make employees more uneasy about what it's being done for. And here is a graph from last year that shows the least preferred types of workplace surveillance. And up the top is, surprise, surprise, facial recognition software and mood monitoring. 76% of people who were asked found this unacceptable. Then recording of location, where you are on wearables, 67% of people found that uncomfortable. And then monitoring social media outside of work hours, 69%. And then monitoring keyboard activity was less at 57%, I guess because it's been around for longer and people are more used to that, but also it's not as invasive, seemingly. And increased tracking can backfire. And there's a study here saying that performance stays the same, people don't improve their productivity if they don't know why they're suddenly being tracked. If there's no explanation, it's just been introduced. And that there's no corresponding rewards for being tracked. So you've got to give employees an explanation and that they buy into it and that they get rewarded. Otherwise, it's not going to make, according to this study, a difference. And so I'm arguing, and I think everyone in the room would probably agree, that we need to think about how do we make this kind of tracking more transparent and accountable, and that for people to be able to accept and see the benefits. And so that employees can see what's being tracked about them, be able to manage it, and where, if they've had a really bad day or an off day, could they remove their own data and be able to forget that day. And I also think we should shift our emphasis from focusing on the workforce or on the individual to the workplace. How can we use this new technology to improve the workplace? And if we do that, you might be able to improve productivity that way rather than focusing on the individual. And then I think we need to think more about work enhancement tools in addition to being able to track and monitor and measure. And one from my colleague's partner, Duncan, who works at a company, uses this software called Sococo, and it has been around for many years now to connect remote workers who work in these very large international teams. And what it does is it increases their awareness and connectedness with others through using this type of visualization. And many of us from CSCW will know this as a form of social translucence. You can see at a glance using icons which move around where people are in a virtual office. And you can connect with them and you can move up and down the virtual floors. You can get colleagues to spontaneously collaborate. You can search for colleagues. You can see whether they're available to chat. You can have meetings and so on. So this is a really nice way of visualizing and giving everyone, particularly those who are remote, a sense of being connected and wanting to be there at the workplace. Slack, as we know, has grown phenomenally, and it's where work happens. And it's a very lightweight support tool for many organizations. And as I saw yesterday, it's the same as with Teams. It also provides a shared workspace. And this morning I was looking at the difference between Teams and Slack, and you'll be pleased to know that there are more people, companies now using Teams, in fact 13+ million daily active users, than there are Slack. Slack is getting worried because Teams is taking over. So you're obviously doing something right there in terms of supporting Teams with this type of software. And I'd like to move on to thinking about not negative surveillance, but positive. Maybe that's the wrong term, but it just makes you think, can surveillance be a good thing rather than always being a negative thing? And that we can use these technologies. They shouldn't always be seen as evil, but that they optimize the workplace and that the people working there buy into it, whether it's cyber-physical systems, Internet of Things, machine intelligence, and nice visualizations that show where people are and how you can connect with them. And that we should be emphasizing making the workplace safe, efficient, comfortable, and collaborative. So all of those things rather than focusing on productivity per se. And that we should design new interventions to improve workflows, intelligent workflows, that fits into the work culture. And finally, I just want to finish with a slide that should nicely move into Steve's talk, which is, I think we shouldn't be always emphasizing productivity, and that productivity can come with when people are happy at work. So we should be thinking about how do we design workplaces that are harmonious, provide harmonious and holistic ways to working. And that requires focusing on the employee experience, and that's what Steve will talk about. And how can we enhance wellness, health, and safety? And also care about things that they care about, which is the environment and sustainability. And as we heard yesterday, it's increasingly important that we develop ethical and acceptable interventions and ways of working. So I think at that note, I'll hand over to Steve to be more provocative.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Yvonne. What I want to do in my section of the talk is I want to move maybe from the more kind of cultural, organizational, to thinking a little bit more about individuals, and I'll talk both about concepts of productivity, our own attempts with our research, trying to engender or promote individual productivity, our own failed attempts, I should say. And then I'll finish by talking about employee well-being and the relationship between that and productivity measures. So as I say, I'll be talking more about individual perspectives, and I'll start off by just revisiting some of those conceptual and measurement issues that Yvonne drew attention to. I'll talk about 2 case studies from personal informatics, where we've tried to do productivity-based interventions, and now come back to some outstanding issues which bridge the 2 talks that we've done today. So let's just come back to definition and measurement, and I think one fundamental problem is that there are a lot of things in productivity that we can rather easily measure, which may not be amazingly meaningful. So for a given employee, we can look at how much time they spend on a particular task. We can look at the number of reports they produce. We can look at the number of lines of code. We can even look at the number of workplace goals that they generate. But basically, more is not always better. So I'm not sure if I spent 4.5 hours on this presentation, I'm not sure all of you would think that that was necessarily a great and better presentation. But at the same time, I'm not sure all of us would agree on what the definition of a great presentation is. So that's one clear problem, is how we get good quality metrics. Another problem, which very closely bears on the issue of individual motivation is, do we want to use objective measures or subjective ones? Because if we use objective measures, they may not be the way that employees see a particular situation. And if we're trying to motivate, we have to think about what the individual's perspective is. And then some of these other issues that Yvonne brought up is there's some very subtle issues surrounding work-life balance. And I guess Brendan also brings these issues up in the development context, which is we can't just be focused on the product itself. We need to have some kind of measure in our divisor here about the total proportion of the employee's life that they're actually spending in work. So not good enough to produce amazingly high-quality product if that's kind of a 70, 80, 90-hour work week. And then I think there's some other rather difficult issues. So one clear issue is individual versus team productivity. I'm sure all of us have worked on teams with amazingly successful individuals who somehow or other don't seem to contribute a fantastic amount to our team productivity. A related issue is talk versus work. So if you're a manager, you spend a great deal of time doing email. Is that work? Well, probably yes, because without you doing all of that kind of interstitial stuff, your team's not going to be productive. Same thing, if you're a collaborative team manager, you're trying to be very responsive to your teammates' questions about work-related tasks because you're all in it together. But Gloria Mark's work again, the more time you spend in email, the less productive you are, both subjectively and objectively. So I think some very tough conceptual issues that it's not immediately apparent how we might actually disentangle those issues. And then I think there's this very general perception, there's a, as we're all aware, general backlash against tech, but productivity too. I think if you talk to the, person in the street, what they're going to tell you is tech is actually making us less rather than more productive. Now, we could talk about the semantics of that, but I think that's the first reaction that many people would bring you if you're talking about tech. So in terms of, some very kind of very simplistic high-level perspective, how have we got to where we are in terms of tech approaches to productivity? So obviously, Microsoft, a pioneer in terms of task-based approaches. So you think word processing programs, spreadsheet programs. So the idea here is you take a task that can benefit from automation, producing high-quality documents, for example. You produce some kind of tool, and that's one approach to productivity. Phase 2 of this kind of approach is you introduce smarts into it, and these can be kind of methods like spell check or grammar checking or increasingly kind of task inferencing. So those are things in the past. What I want to talk about more today is the new approach, which is to focus on trying to model and, quotes, optimize a person. So, this is very obvious. This is the IoT, Internet of Things type approach. We've got so much data now about every person. What we can do is we can track all their behaviors in the workplace, how they spend their time. Increasingly, as Gloria Mark talked about the other day, we can also use new hardware to track emotions and stress. I'm using those terms advisedly. If people want to discuss it, I'm somewhat of a skeptic about the extent to which that hardware is actually detecting those things. But the general approach here is collect amazingly rich data about an individual, generate models of them, and then given those kind of models, help them to improve. And what I want to talk about today is kind of both whether that's possible, our attempts to do this with a couple of worked examples, and maybe we can visit the question about what it means to kind of improve in this context. So 2 examples, as I say. The first example is from a project that we worked on to help people better focus in the workplace. And the second example I want to talk about is a well-being example. So the first lesson which I want to flag up to you, which is we can design tools which we think will enhance productivity. They may not necessarily have the impacts that we intend. So, you know, everybody, I guess a lot of people here went to Gloria Mark's excellent keynote the other day. So we all know what this problem is. Whenever we use digital devices, we suffer from attention fragmentation. So the truly mind-blowing statistic from Gloria's work is the median time between switching between applications is 40 seconds, right? Truly amazing. And then there's a lot of very good work which has shown that there are costs to doing this, which is if you switch frequently, you can't remember anything about your primary task. There's a lot of interesting research on students which show frequent task switches have lower grades, lower GPA, and of course there are stress implications. You multitask a lot, switch tasks a lot, then you have stress consequences for doing that. So why are people doing this? I think, you know, again, this is completely self-evident. Well, part of the time it's completely justified. So if I'm doing research in relation to a document, then what I'm doing is I'm moving between a browser and that target document very frequently. Or if I'm working with colleagues on a particular product, I might be in and out of email and that document. Those, if you like, are explainable switches. But what, again, Gloria Mark's research suggests, which is very, very interesting, is about half the time that we switch between applications, there is no task-related reason for doing so. So a lot of task switching is optional. So one of the things that we tried to do in this first project is we tried to better understand the reasons why people were task switching and, if you like, how people saw their use of time, and then we tried to devise an intervention which would kind of help them to kind of moderate that situation. So we did a bunch of interviews. These are with both office workers and with students. So one of the big problems that people have is just basically keeping track of time, right? So neither of these observations is going to be amazingly insightful to you, right? So here's one person. It's very difficult to be aware of things. You dip into email for 10 minutes, but you may be unaware that half the day is gone if you keep doing it. Yes, right? We're all totally familiar with this experience. With the browser, it's easy to get absorbed in a cumulative aspect. When you start on one page and then several links down the road, you've wasted an hour or so. Right? So about 38% of people describe this kind of lost in email experience at work. So what we did in this first intervention is, the observation is people find it hard to monitor the use of time. Why don't we develop an app which enhances their awareness of use of time? And then if we do this right, this should allow them to allocate time more systematically to their work goals. OK, all makes sense. OK, so designers out there, do not laugh. OK, this is a very, very complicated use of time app, right? So I'm not really going to spend a lot of time explaining how it goes. But basically, what this is an undismissible app. You load this app. You can't get rid of it off your workspace. And what this shows is, for this employee, they're spending most of their time in it. This is over the last 30 minutes. They've spent most of their time in Acrobat, and they've spent a little bit of their time in Facebook, right? So this is always running on your desktop. I emphasize it's undismissible. So we did an audit of similar kind of use of time apps, and we came up with these following properties. So the thing needs to be really simple, right? Because if it's complicated, it distracts, and that's an ironic effect. It needs to show recent activities, because what we don't want people to be doing is some kind of philosophical analysis of their long-term usage behaviors, right? So we don't want, this is rescue time. If you know that product, right, you're not going to say, OK, I'm trying to be really focused, but where is my time quite going? Right? I'll spend 23 minutes analyzing this amazingly complex visualization. It's always on, as I say, because you want to be on task. You don't want to think, oh, Shall I go out and switch the task, use of time app on? No, it's always on. And the point that Yvonne made, if we want people to be more productive, we don't want to think that this is kind of like, a management stalking horse that can be used to kind of track what they're doing. And, so this research is about 3 years old. I mean, you're all aware of kind of what's out there. So a lot of the mobile phone companies, I should emphasize this is a computer-based app, but, Apple has this now on your phone. This is the Android version. And what's really interesting to me is they're actually use of time apps, but they are being positioned as well-being apps, right? Because that's kind of how we're beginning to think about this problem. OK, so what did we do? So we basically did a fairly simplistic intervention. We said to people, on some days, we'd like you to work with that app. And on other days, we'd just like you to kind of work normally. And we had 61 people used the app. About a third of them were office workers. The rest were students. And so here's our basic intuition, that if you have that use of time app, then that should actually increase the amount of time you spend on task. And fabulous, OK? So here we have green is without me time, orange is with it. So what you see is when you have use of time information, drops your email usage, drops your use of the browser, drops your use of Facebook, right? Absolutely fantastic. OK, so now let's look at productivity apps. Absolutely no difference, right? And this isn't, we've done it twice. We've done 2 separate interventions, same result both times. OK, so the unintended consequence is if you tell people how you're using their time, they don't necessarily allocate it more to productivity-based apps. What they do is they take that time and they go offline. So what seems to be the case is, for these users, what productivity is, I pointed those definitional problems at the beginning. It's not the number of minutes that they spend working. It's the number, it's some function of the total amount of time they're spending getting the work they're expected to do done. It's not what we intended, but it might be a good thing, right? Discuss. OK, so from a design perspective, what we learned was you can provide people with rich data about what they're doing, but it may not have the anticipated behaviors. So, again, from a design perspective, we need to do more than just provide a dashboard. And what I want now to do, which I think is more controversial, is to suggest that if we do actually want to change people's habits, then we need something that's a more targeted approach. And this, I should also point out that this, if we do want to change people's habits, we have to think about people's motivations in the way that Yvonne characterized. So I want to just very quickly talk about some psychological perspectives, some psychological theorizing on how you actually change people's behavior. So there's quite a substantial literature, and there's a very important theory, which is called implementation intentions, which was introduced by Gollwitzer. And basically, what Gollwitzer says is, if you want to change a particular behavior, you first have to develop a model of that behavior, which in this case is productivity. So what we first need to do is we need to understand the relationship between things that people do and the outcome, which is productivity. We then need to use that model to identify which of a person's behaviors are most affecting their productivity both ways. We need to show that to that person, and then we need to encourage them to engage in behaviors which will, those behaviors, engage in and plan those behaviors which most impact that particular outcome. So, let's imagine, subject to these kind of definitional problems, that we know that productivity is some kind of function of a person's workload, the number of their unread emails, how big their office is. We know that's really important, right? Their personal mood, maybe their manager's mood, the amount of exercise they got, how much they slept, and the number of breaks they took. Okay, so let's just say that that's our model, because we're going to instrument everything, so we're going to be able to do that. Okay, and so within this kind of theory, what we say is we take that, and for an individual worker, because we've instrumented them, we find that the factor that's having the biggest thing for that particular individual is not their office size, surprisingly enough, it's the number of breaks they take. We show the user that model, and what we then encourage them to do is to calendar in that particular behavior that's having the biggest impact on their productivity. And this is really important. They have to make a concrete plan to increase their number of breaks, if that's the thing that's kind of having the biggest impact. Or they need to increase the size of their office, if that's the thing that's having the biggest impact. Corner office, sometimes that's really important for productivity. You guys know that. Okay, so unfortunately, we haven't done that intervention in the context of productivity, but we have done something similar in the context of well-being and emotion regulation. So I just, quick kind of sidebar. So the reason why we've been doing this work is there's lots of research which basically shows that emotion regulation is an important behavior in terms of people's life and work outcomes. So people who have really good emotion regulation strategies show they're more gainfully employed and they're healthier. But really in this context, I'm showing you this example because it can show you how we can apply that underlying implementation intentions model. So how does this work? In the context of our emotion regulation model, what we do is two parts of the system. So it's a mobile app, and what it does is it pings you multiple times per day. It says, how are you feeling? Right? You give a mood score, and then it asks you about a bunch of factors which are contributing to that mood. So it might say, did you eat well? Did you sleep well? Did you exercise? And then various work-related questions. And what we find is that after we've kind of done about 2 weeks of deploying that set of questions, we can get a reasonably accurate model of what factors are contributing to their mood. So that's not very novel, right? What is novel is the second part of the system that I want to talk about. What we do is we take that model and then we use it to recommend to people particular intervention behaviors that they can engage in. So let me show you how that works. So we have mood scores for a given person over different days. We can develop a mood model to make, so here's today. What we do is we use that mood model to make a prediction to somebody about how they're likely to feel tomorrow and the day after. But the novel part of the system is this kind of recommendation component at the top, which is informed by that model we've built of that person. So we know for this particular individual that how they feel is influenced by how well they've eaten and also their social life. So what that green thing up there does is it's an implicit recommendation to somebody to try and schedule those activities. And what this change in the graph shows is if you schedule those activities, that's how that outcome will change. In other words, if you schedule a healthy eating event and a social event, the system will change to show you the mood boost that you get from that. So the idea behind this is we have an underlying model, which is based off data that we've collected. We show the user what things affect that outcome, and we encourage them to plan particular behaviors which will actually increase that target outcome, right? So it's motivated because the person can see the reason why they want to engage in that behavior has some outcome that's presumably motivating to them. So just really quickly, in the interest of time, I'm just going to whiz through. So we've done various evaluations. We've evaluated this particular method 3 times. And basically, for this particular outcome, we can show people have improved mood. And perhaps more importantly, they have better strategies for effectively changing their mood. In other words, they're more informed about the set of activities which they believe will actually have a positive influence on their mood. OK, so second lesson. it's not necessarily, if we want to change people's behavior, it's not enough to just passively give them feedback. What we want to do, or what we need to do, is we need to think about ways to help them target and schedule specific behaviors that are going to kind of have productivity outcomes. And the way that we do that is we use this kind of theory which shows people the impact, positive impact of engaging in a particular behavior which is motivated by their model. And we encourage them to make a plan to schedule that behavior. So I'll point out in the context of that well-being app, it's integrated with a calendar which actually has you kind of put those things on your schedule. Okay, and the second point I want to make in the context of kind of funky AI, which we're all into these days, is we could not do this with a neural nets model because basically you have to have something that's kind of explainable and comprehensible. So the features have to be particular behaviors which are comprehensible to people, because if people can't actually visualize a concrete activity that they can engage in and plan, so it's no good having some machine learning derived feature in this model, because that's not a thing that a person can plan. So this is, again, an argument for having these much more user-centric models, and I can talk about how we might actually do that. OK, so to sum up my bit, 2 case studies. The first one is, given the tools, they might do very sensible things which aren't necessarily what we planned, which brings up the question like, well, what are we actually trying to optimize here? The second thing is, if we do actually want to optimize things, and we do want to give more than kind of like dashboard level information, we need to think about how we can take what's possible now with these kind of cyberhuman models to build something that a person can understand and they can see what they personally can do something about in terms of a concrete plan, right? So the question, I've shown you this in terms of well-being. One question is, can we also do this for productivity? OK, so I just want, before we come to kind of some provocations or talking, so I just want to kind of say, here are some things that I didn't manage to get to, which are clearly still totally outstanding. We haven't come back to, we still have outstanding issues about definition and management and measurement, and these have kind of quite clearly come up in the context of this talk. We gave people a tool which showed them about use of time. What they did was they produced their own behaviors which were closer to trying to optimize work-life balance. And of course, there are still these outstanding questions that I haven't addressed at all here, which are individual versus team productivity and work versus talk. OK, so then more questions than answers. So let me just kind of come. So we can finish right there. But if people want to begin a conversation, then these are some thoughts that we had in the context of trying to frame questions that we might want to talk about more during the day. Do you want to?
Oops, sorry. Nice shoes.
Yeah.
Steve, so I grew up, as you did, in the East, in Florham Park, New Jersey. Maybe this question is informed by that. But so, it seems like the path to, workplace productivity salvation is in mindfulness, right? So be aware of what's going on and reflect that upon your own behavior and the causes of your reactions and then improve upon it, right? So given that, if you buy that theory, then it seems like the idea of having an app tell you what to do is like the opposite of mindfulness. So what do you think of that?
Well, I think what you want, so the idea behind the app is not to tell you what to do every second of the day. It's to basically give you greater insight into how you're actually using your time and to better understand the relationship between your particular work or life goals and particular activities that you engage in. So the app isn't telling you what to do. Notice that the app just offers up the information, and then you plan how you use your time. But it's very important for the theory that you don't just say, so, think about New Year's resolutions, right? Most people say, I'm going to drink less, and I'm going to go out more, right? Those don't convert. Those aren't very good New Year resolutions in terms of their efficacy because they're not specific enough. So that's what. So basically, the idea behind the model here is it informs you, but you plan what you're doing. And it's not planning every minute of the day. It's planning particular activities which are meant to have implications for your overall goals.
So I guess I would argue that maybe better if you tell people this is what is going on rather than tell them what to do. Sort of like, that promotes mindfulness.
Well, they're deciding what to do, right? So it's not like the app says you're going to take more breaks. The app says this is how you're spending your time. Make a plan to change that if you want to change it. But it's important. It is important that you commit to that, because if you don't commit to that, then you're in the I'm going to smoke less type of territory, as opposed to when I go to the pub on Friday nights, I'm going to try to smoke one fewer cigarette, which is more likely to happen, the second one.
So I'm struggling with something fundamental here, which is about maybe the first question, which is what are we trying to improve?
Yes.
Because it seems to me that the whole notion of productivity and efficiency is last century. It
Yes.
goes back to Gilbreth and Taylor and time and motion studies, and how can we do things more efficiently and get more work done, get more things done. And really, I think we need to revisit that. I'm not sure what concept replaces that, but to me, when I talk to younger people about work and what they want out of work, it's much more about creativity, it's about social value, it's about how am I contributing to society, it's about innovation, and none of those things have to do with efficiency. They're about something very different at work, and what I worry about is we don't have a good concept to replace those old notions, and they're really old. I mean, they go way back to assembly lines, and all of that work that was done back then. So, for me, it's key to kind of think about what are our aspirations at work, and how do we change our notions of what those things are, and update them to reflect what people really want out of work. I think well-being's a little bit too wishy-washy as well. It's not just about that. It's about making a difference through the things that you do. Maybe related to notions of flow too. So.
Yeah, or maybe it's closer to this type of notion. I mean, because that's not committing to any particular definition of what the job is. Because I think it could vary for different people, and it may not be, the entire population may not be able to kind of be creative in a job, but at least they should, be able to find a job that is, subject to some value, it's rewarding to them.
But
So
I think there's a real tension between what you as an individual can achieve and the awareness of the things that are important to you and the company you work for and what they expect from you. So if you're working at McDonald's or somewhere, it's very different than if you're working in an architect's practice where you have much more freedom about how you do your work and how you're valued and how you're appraised. And maybe it goes right back to the value of the whole thing about rewards and appraisal and what's expected of you at work. And we need to go maybe even a step further back than rethinking productivity.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of us here. We were just involved in quite a large study here at Microsoft looking at developer satisfaction and developer perceived productivity. And we developed these models that have all of these different factors that help explain their perceived satisfaction and perceived productivity. And many of these things came out. And some of the most important factors were doing impactful work. So that was important to their satisfaction, but also to their productivity. Being an important contributor on their team was another factor. So I think that we could maybe start looking at those things and then sort of combine it with this, which is very actionable, to get people to kind of track what it is that they're doing, that then improve these perceived measures?
And it might be a question of granularity here, because I mean, a different way of playing back where you just said, Abby, is that these kind of things are kind of like monthly. These are more kind of like personal evaluation type things, whereas a lot of the productivity work has been kind of, what are you doing on a daily basis? So it might be interesting, just as a thought exercise, to think, well, what would me time look like for a year? Right? So what would it mean to kind of have use of time around kind of maybe more, you know, so to what extent did I do, you know, kind of mentoring work? To what extent did I do kind of core project work? To what extent did I do kind of, you know, company kind of charitable? You know, so you might imagine you can dashboard anything, right? And you can make anything actionable. So I think it is a question. So it might be that by abstracting, you know, because I think this, I think you're right. I mean, this kind of micro stuff is not very motivational. I mean, it's motivational in one sense, right? But I think in the larger sense, if you're thinking about being a manager and trying to incentivize employees, this kind of stuff is not really. Yeah. So point taken. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I really like this, and I think you could apply this in a bigger setting.
Yeah.
As you say.
Yeah.
On that, I think so. There's the reviewing what's happened before, like, you know, how much over time previously. There's also, is this going anywhere? I think that might link more to the meaning of it or the rewarding aspect. Like, is this thing that I'm doing right now actually leading to anything, or is this a task that is something that I don't really know what's going to happen to it? So, like, if we were going to have some kind of timeline thing that shows you over time, maybe where has this task come from? Like, is this actually something that is a part of a bigger thing that's going to continue?
So, yeah, so I kind of, that's one of the nice things you get about this kind of implementation intention, which is it's supposed to be that you should be able to tell the impact of a thing you're doing now for some, an outcome that you think is important. So I think that's, because that relates to the question of meaning, right? Because nobody wants to be doing stuff that's a waste of time, right?
But it might also help improve the way the business or the organisation wrap, because there's lots of things where actually no one really knows what the end point is, or no one really knows where it came from, or where it came from is no longer relevant, but it's a thing that's continued to be. I mean, I can think of tasks like that where.
I mean, this is, so I guess a lot of this is already in kind of software productivity tools, because you're just describing kind of dependencies now, but maybe what you want to do is you might want to think about not just who is this for, but maybe kind of what would that person get from this? How important is this particular thing that I'm doing for the team in general? So there might be some kind of feedback you could give for that.
I think you were next, and then you did.
So, I mean, this goes along with what Abby said, which is creativity. So for me personally, the more uninterrupted time I can have, the more I can actually reach creativity. You know, there's the deep work concept. And so, like, in the measures there, like, if you get little pieces of something, like, it doesn't coalesce to a whole. You know, so I don't know if you can measure, like.
So you're talking about like a flow concept.
At some point you have to reflect on what you've done as to whether you have had a creative time, and maybe these tools that we're suggesting, you know, these might not be these tools, but there could be, you know, new kinds of reflection tools on, and you maybe could get, you know, like the 360 degree, you could do that for creativity. So others could say, well, yes, that's really creative what you've done there. But it's like, how do you measure those flow or creativity? We don't have tools in a way which we do for productivity or usability, and that's something that's quite hard to measure because it's so subjective as to where they.
In like the bar charts and things like that.
Yeah.
It's an aggregate, but if it's like 10 minutes every now and then, it's not the same as.
But I mean, so certainly me time might. So we all know that interruptions break flow. I think we may not know exactly what flow is. So you could have these types of tools, You know, you could imagine something that was like me time, which was showing, and if you had different kind of reporting structures associated with those, so you could, you know, maybe it could prompt you to say, you know, in a more analytic or reflective sense, you know, these have been your kind of, you know, this is a pattern of your work time during the day. Tag that up in terms of, you know, how rewarding that felt. So then maybe you could better understand what the characteristics of those kind of flow type, you know, what characterize those kind of flow type experiences. Because I think we can get you, I think you can use these types of tools to kind of overcome that kind of persistent, you know, attention fragmentation, but it would be great to better understand, you know, just how long that was and, you know, what had been involved, what was the setup for that. And maybe, I think the other point that we can't lose in all this is most people are part of a team. You know, I guess the team talk yesterday is like, you know, people spend 82% of their time in teamwork. I'm not sure how that's exactly measured, but, you know, so that's the eternal tension here, isn't it? I mean, it's like I can be in flow, but if you need the answer to your, you know, kind of urgent question, so yeah, you know, I think that's it. But I think we can instrument better, and I think we can ask questions about maybe meaning, you know, by elevating this from use of time to kind of meaning or flow. I think we could better understand what it would take to be in that situation.
Both great talks. I want to focus on this ethical side of things. And given this day and age, we know that there are severe consequences for personal autonomy, psychology, the sort of well-being due to widespread bulk collection of highly sensitive data. And, you know, given that work is following us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, if we're trying to measure productivity using these extremely sensitive signals, that means that, you know, our ability to perform boundary kind of regulation becomes extremely complicated and difficult, right? And so I was wondering if, you know, our machine learning approach of like collecting everything we can collect and then trying to do feature selection is, of course, completely the wrong way to do an ethical version of this. And I wonder, based upon what you've seen, Yvonne, about the, about some of the successes that have been seen. I wonder if we can go back and see, okay, what is it that we learned, you know, in that? And is there a different way that those insights could have been derived without any bulk surveillance? Are there lightweight data that we can minimize, we can collect, that will have done exactly the same job without completely infringing on people's human rights?
I think that's a really important point. And I started off my talk saying how the spreadsheet's it can be a very strong motivator, and it can be very rewarding if you see that your efforts have resulted in you improving your performance, and then you can feel proud. And that may be in itself sufficient, but now that we can collect, as you say, you know, much more data about people, does having that fine grain, you know, that granularity actually, you know, provide better or increased productivity relative to how people feel? Because I think, you know, you do read, although I haven't seen many studies of just how uneasy people feel, it's very much reported, you know, in the press that it's just, you know, we shouldn't be doing this, or, you know, how far have we gone? And is it, you know, do people feel comfortable that knowing that their social media, their Facebook posts are being analyzed by people at work? And that seems to me maybe we've gone too far. Is why do we need to do this? How is that informing the company's you know, goals and practices? And so I think we do need to have more studies where we can say, well, you get enough, or you get plenty of data about someone's productivity, if that's still a desirable goal, by just doing this. If you go this far, then productivity might actually go down, and people start to resent the fact that they, you know, where they're going is being tracked. So I think my point about cyber-physical systems is that you can track the workplace, the equipment and things, and that can make, you know, people's lives more efficient because they know where things are. But as soon as you start tracking people, then I think you've crossed the line, and that's where we might be thinking about, look, why are we doing all of this? I don't know if you want to.
Well, I mean, I don't have an in principle decision, but basically we designed that app against, so Rescue Time, as you know, is server-based, and they're basically profiling huge numbers of people. So our app was deliberately designed to be private, to kind of finesse some of these, and our other well-being, everything's kind of on the phone, basically, for that kind of reason. But of course, I'm not a corporation, so.
To ask, just in relation to Steve's talk about the individual versus productivity, is in a large organization division like Office, ambiguity is one of the major detractors of productivity. Typically, when smart people know the problem, they're productive in it. But I've found in my time in the organization is that when people are kind of faced with ambiguity about goals, objectives, these type of things, in addition to grey areas of roles and responsibilities, productivity drops like a stone despite capability. And an antidote to that is clear communication, flow of expectation, defined ROV. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Documentation is something that we've thought about, and it's something that's obviously is an antidote for that. The other thing as well is the individual aspect of the multiplier effect. So having key individuals in organizations, their job isn't to write code, but it's to bring others, raise others. But that's at odds with the whole tribal knowledge feedback that we get. So kind of along with that. So wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
So I mean, I'd just say the ambiguity point I think is a really interesting one, but we can do things to kind of moderate ambiguity. We can't remove it because intrinsically certain new things, I mean, it depends on what, I'm not familiar with exactly what, your kind of workflow or tasks are. If you're doing new stuff that's not been done before or that involves technology that's novel, you're going to get ambiguity, right? So the best that you can do under those circumstances is to think about ways to kind of minimize that, make people aware of that's the set of operating conditions as opposed to a more normal situation. So if somebody's floundering, they should know which class of situation they're in. So I'm just saying it may not be possible to remove ambiguity, but if you can parameterize the situation, then you can at least understand what situation you're in. So these types of goal-directed approaches, I don't think they're going to function amazingly well in an ambiguous situation because it's really not clear, that you can define the goal or measure the goal under those circumstances. But basically, you can certainly see how these approaches abstractly are basically trying to have people focus on particular things that they should be thinking about doing systematically that have a direct impact on the thing that they or everybody is trying to do. And that can kind of, if not remove, but minimize ambiguity. So you can treat these things literally, or you can treat them more kind of metaphorically.
Can I just chip in on that? Because there's a bunch of studies that are summed up in the Glass Cage book, which show exactly that people are happiest if they've got clear goals, and they have a set of skills to apply against those goals and stretch their talents. And they're way happier doing that than doing nothing, than being on a beach. Right? So, I think it's exactly what you're saying is right.
But you do need to think about what you do when you have an ambiguous situation, right?
And there's several different antidotes for it, and that's what we're struggling with. Yeah. What is the right antidote?
Yeah.
You've had your hand up for ages.
Yeah, and I want to respond to this and then the question. Sometimes you can have clear goals but still have lots of ambiguity. And clear goals right now, most organizations are designed, managers and leaders are designed, the roles are designed to handle ambiguity, to reduce that as you go down the hierarchy, to create more and more clarity. But organizations are increasingly being shifted so that role is spread out because technology is empowering more of the work population to be able to handle that kind of moderate levels of ambiguity and uncertainty in their roles because they can have more perspective driven towards them in information. I think it's a skill growth issue for, we build that skill in managers, we build that, we select leaders for the ability to have that skill. Everybody's going to have to be able to do more of that. So just a response to that. I tend to think about this problem as, you know, the agency problem, which is really about how much control I have about what I do and how I do it. The inspectability of the work that I have. If somebody's not watching me do the work or doing work with me, if they can come along later and actually decide what quality outcome that's actually delivered, either during the work or after it's completed. And how much direction am I getting from? And I think we have the capability to do a lot of that with current technology that we don't have. You know, Microsoft can read my email if they chose to do so. They don't choose to do so. Unless there's a legal issue causing them to need to read through my email. And so the email I consider that I do for work is I consider that my own. It's private unless otherwise necessary. If I break some sort of rule of law, that it has to be inspected by some corporate entity. I don't know why the same thing can't be true for other sources of data, sensor and monitoring. That is presumed to be used and directed towards me as an employee as an initial assumption, and then there are exceptions to that assumption in certain cases. And so if I am have all these sensors on me that are both infrastructure enabled as well as on my body, I can use that to support my own work and my own effectiveness. Because of the team, I can reveal that information just like I do with email and Teams, selectively to different groups of people. And if I take a 7-month vacation, the workplace can then say, okay, has Carl been at work, and is that probably not? Because that becomes an exception to that. Does that sort of make sense, right? So it's one of those. I feel like I have agency about how I use email, when I use it, what's in there. It is a product that my work is highly difficult to inspect. Work development in the company, but the organization has ceded control.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So, but have you got a point?
Yeah. Maybe the word inspect is the wrong way of thinking about it, and it's more about revealing about things. And the more we can sense and the more we can reveal about ourselves, but if we haven't reached our own personal goals or the company's goals, then we perhaps are revealing too much about ourselves. And that can be problematic, where people, how do you deal with the fact that you haven't reached your goals or reached the targets set, or that you are, the rest of the team are doing better than you. And so dealing with disappointment and not succeeding as well, is it that you just need to work harder? And we often think that's the case, but maybe there are other things that are causing you not to be able to, to achieve what you're thinking or expecting to do. And the more you reveal about yourself through your emails and so on, the more this could become magnified. And so I think there's a problem of how much, and it goes back to the point made earlier, how much should we reveal to others about what we're doing?
Yeah, I think, but part of my point is the problem exists today. We have different management philosophies in different corporations that approach that problem. In some cases, you have management is designed to have a high amount of inspection and control of your work on a daily basis. In other instances, you are measured or your work is evaluated periodically, and it's basically an outcome based. Like,
yeah,
you
so
goals or you haven't, and I can coach and help you to do better.
but you can see both sides. So let me describe a concrete behavior which is actually based around this kind of fear of failure. So I did some work on software productivity now quite some time ago. Actually, I'll just mention that it was at Lotus. So, you know, now I don't need to tell you exactly when the time frame was. But basically, one of the things that we saw developers doing was they would complete their work-related goals, but they would not inform the rest of the team that they completed. And the reason why they did this was that they were concerned they might have a stack of goals that they had to execute. If they could get a small goal done early in the week, they could actually take the pressure off themselves, and they would then move on to subsequent goals without telling anybody else on the team, because basically they wanted to avoid the fact that they might have to say they'd failed. Now, this is obviously not team productive, right? Because if somebody's completed an important task that others are dependent on, and they're not telling people that that's complete. So you can see both sides. So I'm not saying let's surveil everybody, but basically there what you want to do is to create a culture which basically says, it's great if you've got your objectives done in the time that you're supposed to have done them, but you get 92% if you've not completed, but you tell us, right? Because if you don't create that second culture, then you've got the problem, which is people have completed things, and then they're kind of implicitly holding everybody back because they're being secretive about those goals. So I think there are ways, and none of this, we're not now talking about tooling, we're talking about ways that we actually organize or create the culture that we create around the set of tools that we have.
Okay, great. So we're at 12 past, and I want to thank Steve and Yvonne for getting us up to great start.